Doug Lowenthal, welcome to Lowenthal Radio.
Thank you.
Talk to me a little bit about your business model at True Technology. You were an MSP, managed service provider. So what was the business model?
So as an MSP, we provided outsourced IT support or technology services to small to medium-sized companies. So my MSP was in North Florida. So we primarily focused on businesses that had, anywhere from like 20 to, several hundred technology users, we call them. And
I remember back in the day when we all had offices, we used an MSP, and this is going to date me and show you how old I am. But I remember we used to use our MSP. We called him our tech guy, and to lace together our computers into a network that would basically all connect into a giant box, and that allowed all of the computers on the network to share files with each other. I mean, this goes way back before Dropbox and other shared filing or file sharing services. So I'm assuming you started being the small business kind of IT guy. What changed in the business? Because we don't, when we started using Dropbox, didn't all you guys go away?
No, well, okay, we're starting from 1980 or so. We can evolve.
I told you I was old.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, that's really when I started cutting my teeth in the space, so I can definitely relate. But no, the migration to the cloud, Dropbox being a cloud-based service has definitely fundamentally changed the way that businesses operated.
Well, why do I need an IT guy? If I've got Dropbox, why do I need an IT guy? What services were you providing? What were you getting billed for? What did you bill customers for?
Yeah, if you think about even just a small organization that's 20 or so people, today voice over IP phones, they're connected to the internet, which represents its own risks. Every one of those devices, the cybersecurity risk is a big part of it.
Oh, right.
Every one of those people on the internet every day getting phishing emails and things, and one wrong click, and all of a sudden their stuff is, ransomware. So protecting them from those malicious actors was a big part of what we wound up doing. It then through, it was interesting in our kind of evolution. We went from what you're kind of referring to, your first relationship, we called a break fix IT company. Something broke, you called them, they fixed it, right? What we wound up evolving to was that became like the bread and the butter, where the steak and the seafood was actually, once we got that stuff dialed in and handled, where things weren't breaking every day, we mitigated risk. Then we were able to actually help you leverage technology to be more productive, more efficient, more competitive, more profitable. So you think about today, if we zoom to, today, AI is the ultimate, technology enabler. But, think a plumbing supply company or an HVAC company, they don't have skill set in-house to be able to leverage those technologies. They need a partner. So it's not just, helping you manage your file access. It's helping you make sure that all works every day and is secure and protected. Then also helping you leverage the latest and greatest technology to make you more productive, competitive.
Which are all SaaS-based products for the most part, right? Like the cybersecurity stuff, the AI stuff, even Microsoft 365 is now, don't get the CDs anymore. It's all cloud-based. So why aren't those companies just going direct? Why don't you just go to 365 or Dropbox or whatever cybersecurity company you're using and buy whatever you need direct? That's, I guess, my first question.
So in some cases you can. 365 is a good example of that. But even for people in this space that manage these technologies every day, that interface literally changes weekly. And when you out of the box, it is not secure. It's not even backed up. There are disclaimers if you actually read them. They don't even take ownership of protecting your data. So there's third-party tools that we used to use to even back up 365 and protect it against malicious actors. So that's you could, but you're opening yourself up to a whole bunch of risk.
Hey, it's John. Look, if you're building to sell, I want to let you know about a resource you may find helpful. It's called the Value Builder Score, and it will evaluate your company in the same way that acquirers will look at your business. It'll give you a score on the 8 factors that drive the value of your company. You'll also get an estimate of value and things you could do to improve that value over time, whether you want to sell now or in a decade from now. Knowing how the movie ends, I think, puts you in the catbird's seat, gives you all kinds of negotiating leverage. So It's available exclusively through a Value Builder advisor. So talk to your advisor. If you don't have one yet, you can go to valuebuilder.com/score. Let us know what industry you're in, and we will connect you with an advisor who specializes in companies like yours. Just go to valuebuilder.com/score. So what's the business model? Like if you're going to talk to a client and say, you really need this cybersecurity product or whatever, how does the money move? So you're recommending, are you buying licenses tokens from that company and then reselling them effectively to the business owner, or are you charging for your time? Like, just give me the business model.
Yeah. So the financial model behind it, to answer that question, it depended on the product, right? So 365, you could buy it direct. There's a list price that's on the web. They can purchase it. When we actually did get that through a supplier, we're able to resell it. The margins on it were pretty dismal. But so then we had basically charge for services for managing it. So there was a tools component of like 365, endpoint security, all these things. Some products are only sold to MSPs. So there is more markup opportunity in managing those, but there's a lot more in managing them. You need the teams of people and the skill sets and such. So, but from a revenue or a cost basis perspective, we had, our tools, the resources that we provided. Then we had our teams and departments and how we structure our services. So the help desk when things broke. The team, we called them centralized services or network operations center, that managed all those tools that were deployed one to many. We had a team of just resources that did what we call technical alignment or auditing of our client environments to find all the things before they broke. There was a team of technology advisors, which were like kind of VCIOs or fractional CIOs that helped with those technology recommendations. And then there's another one that I'm missing. Professional services, like to actually execute on projects and initiatives. So there was different. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So 4 buckets. Just give me if you drew a pie chart. By the time you sort of got this business up and running and eventually got it to a point where you wanted to sell it, what was the pie chart? What proportion of your revenue is coming from each bucket?
Yeah. So for us, we always focused on a monthly recurring revenue model, even 20 years ago when I started. We did it in hours at first, where it was like for reactive support, we did monthly, like you bought so many hours from us. And it was funny. That's when, I'm going to date myself, like Singular was one of the cell phone services. They did rollover minutes. We did rollover hours. We mirrored that. So that was kind of our first kind of go to market, strategy there. But then it evolved into a flat rate type offering where all those things I listed out, with the exception of professional services, because can't really control the volume of change that a client initiated, but we're within that flat per user price. That was a learning journey on like what that number should be, what the gross margin should be on it. How do we price and scope that appropriately, and then deliver on it, to be able to control how many hours we're investing per department.
Sure.
So that was kind of the cost basis of it. But from a revenue perspective, our price point was typically per user. So it was like try to make it super simple from a pricing perspective. But then within that, we're all that blend of services, and we had to manage our cost basis for each one of those departments on delivering on that.
So are you saying 100% of your revenue, the pie chart, was basically recurring per user fees, or was there some professional services stuff there that was more lumpy? Or
So to give you a better number, about 70% of our revenue was recurring revenue.
Yeah.
It was about 20%, which was professional services or project revenue. And then another 10%, which was like product sales, like when someone needed a new PC or a printer or things that they bought through us. So that was kind of the breakdown.
Got it. Okay. That's super helpful. I was doing a little research before we hit record. And I understand there was something in your journey that happened that made you want to get your business to run without you. Maybe can you walk me through that story? What happened?
Well, there was multiple times where I had to be reminded that that's what I wanted. But, it was interesting. I'm not sure specifically what incident you're talking about, but I will say that I was moving, we were selling our home, and had a difficult, seller on the other side that we were buying from. They made us like rent for 2 months before we moved in. I had all this personal turmoil going on. And with that, that was kind of I had to step away from the business quite a bit. And with that, I had to lean more on my leadership team and my team members in general to kind of help fill in the gaps. And they knew what I was doing and they were supporting me through it. And with that, I think that was an eye opener of like, man, I didn't really have to be in the trenches like I was. So that was huge. And when I stepped back in, I realized I don't have to get back in at the level that I was, that I can, I empowered them to be able to help me more, which was huge and enabled me to focus on the things that help the business scale.
Interesting. So this experience of moving and the distraction that it occurred made you realize that your employees can kind of step up and do it. It's like when you're with your kids and something happens and you need them to step in and do something. You're like, oh man, who is that kid? Because I didn't know that kid could do that, do the dishes, make dinner or whatever. Like, right. Where did they show up?
Yeah, no, without doubt. Yeah, it was, I miss my old leadership team. I'm actually attempting to work with them in different ways, within my non-solicit, of course. But no, I had a great team there. We built an awesome culture, and they definitely stepped up and stepped in, and it kind of showed me. Go ahead.
Did you ever call out the elephant in the room and say, "Hey guys, it's clear you can run this thing without me. Like, why didn't you ask me to get out of the way earlier?"
Oh, they did. So yeah, no, they did. We were in the trenches together. I had run the company just shy of 20 years before exiting. And my leadership team, they aspired for me to be on the beach and not be involved in this. And it was, I'll share this. We'll touch on it later, of course, but around post-exit, I had an earnout piece. And what part of it was them hitting an EBITDA growth target year over year. And with that, I was now out of the picture altogether. And they hit the target both years, 2 years in a row without me there. And I actually called the CEO of the platform that I was under. And I was like, hey, can you take a call? Because this kind of shook me a little bit. I was like, did I even need to be there at all? And he said it was a good question. We got on a call and talked about it. But I wanted to learn from that experience of, did I even need to be engaged? But yeah, they were ready and willing, and being as controlling as I was. When you look at type A personality in the encyclopedia, I'm there, waving back at you.
How did that impact your team prior to that incident where you had to move and had to walk away? Being a type A personality, being very involved in the trenches, what impact did that have on your team?
I still keep in touch with them, like I said, and I think that this is now a few years later, right, since I sold the company, and they saw, I think, a work ethic in me that they aspire to mirror, and that was part of, I think, some of them with me for many years, so they kind of saw that, and then were able to really, they're just solid people, but they didn't emulate it because I showed them to emulate it, but I think they saw that I put the effort in, and therefore they should put the effort in. And it kind of made them leaders on their own. But
how did you incentivize them?
How did I incentivize them?
How did you incentivize them? Yeah.
Yeah. So we had I created this, and it was, it was almost like paying homage to them. It was twofold. I had a bonus pool, not a pool, actually. It was a percentage of profit that I distributed. This was pre-sale. I don't know if it still exists or not in the new structure, but where they got a percentage of the net profit quarterly of the business. What, for me, there was two parts to it. One was that I wanted them to, I wanted to appreciate them and show them that I appreciated all their efforts, and they got the financial, benefit from that. The other part was, for the first time, I wanted to open the books up to someone else other than myself and the accounting, individuals. So I wanted them to see the drivers and, the cost of goods and gross margin, and start really looking closer at those things. So that was my way of doing that, in hopes that maybe it'll make some light bulbs go off and change some, behavior, if there was behavior to change. So that was part of it. But that's when I implemented that. It was an interesting kind of journey the first time they saw those numbers and what that looked like. And
I'd love to dig in there, because I actually saw Jack Stack speak, the guy who wrote Stake in the Outcome, and with Bo Burlingham 25 years ago. And he talked about employee ownership and opening the books and being transparent with employees. And he said, but be careful, because a little information can be a dangerous thing. If you're going to open your books and share your numbers with your employees, it's incumbent on you to educate your employees almost to a point of insanity, where you're going so deeply with them, trying to educate them about the numbers, because just a little bit of information that can draw some really wild conclusions. What did you experience when you opened up the numbers to your management team?
Yeah, so financial education was part of our culture already. So when we hired on a new employee, day one, I would actually show them our financial model, what our gross margin targets were. So I wanted them to know that when $100 came into the business, that Doug didn't get $100, right? Like, this was our net profit target. This was our revenue buckets, just like you asked me earlier, how we made money and where the money went. So that was day one when a new hire started. So that was part of that. But I will say, though, that when I did open up the books, like, I was in business nearly 20 years. There was a period early on where I had to get an equity line on my house to keep the business going. Like, they weren't seeing that. So part of before opening it up, like, I had to explain to them, like, now that I'm doing, at that point, it was over $1 million in net profit, like, that it wasn't always that way. And that, they've seen the sweat equity I put in, but they didn't see the financial equity that I had also invested. So that was part of it, of kind of like, giving them the backstory. And before they saw, like, holy shit, Doug made $1 million last year, like, what's going on here? So I think that they all, by the time they saw the numbers, I didn't see their eyes go, super wide. It was well prefaced. I hope it was.
You mentioned that you incentivize them in two ways. One, there was a quarterly profit sharing bonus pool that they participated in. What was the second way?
Quarterly profit. No, that was it. It was really just the epiphany I had, and when showing it to them was two different things. But no, it was just one thing.
Okay, got it. So they would have a quarterly share of the profit. Now, one of the things I've heard from other business owners is that can be dangerous, and I'd be curious to know if this happened to you, because employees get so focused on profitability, which sounds great, but can oftentimes delay or defer or outright resist investments that make the business better long term. They start to get this very kind of quarterly, almost like a CEO of a public company. They're like, oh, we got to meet our number this quarter. And it's like, yep. No, we actually have to make some of these investments that are more long term in nature. What was your experience with that? Did you experience any sort of short term thinking among the team?
No, I didn't, fortunately. I think we had a great culture, and they trusted me as a leader to make the right decisions. And they saw the numbers ebb and flow based on the investments we were making, but they knew that we were growing, we were scaling. We had a strong sales engine. We brought in new clients consistently, and they saw what was happening. So, fortunately, I didn't experience that. And I think that they had the right mindset, and that, as the pie gets bigger, they just get, a piece of it. And just to point this out, it was just my leadership team, just a handful of individuals. It wasn't the whole company that saw the books or anything. It was just them that were compensated that way. And we got to see that.
You mentioned your work ethic. Maybe walk me through what that looked like. What kind of hours were you pulling? What made it clear to your direct reports, your management team, that you were working hard?
So this is a journey, right? So it was worse at times. I mean, there was a time for like a solid year that I took on call on, meaning like anything that happened after hours, even though I had a team, at that point, like 15 people, I did it. And I literally, to be honest with you, John, on, Thanksgiving, I wound up in the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack. It was like that level of stress.
Wow.
So that was, it's interesting, these times, these pivotal moments in the journey where it's like you stop and reflect and you're like, okay, I have control over this, right? So this is my personal journey around this. And, I can make some decisions. Like, what do I have control over? What can I do to improve this? And in that case, I remember, went through that, came back and, wound up implementing like an on-call system, and was like, this thing's getting rolled out. Like, I'm literally turning it over. And the team stepped up. They always did and always do. But I would say, seeing me take ownership of things, sometimes obviously to an extreme, But, just being kind of, we used Microsoft Teams. So like I would see all the conversations in the channels, and I was always staying in touch with what was happening and chime in. If there was something going on at 2 a.m., and someone's working on something, I'd, pop in and ask if I can help, even though I shouldn't have, or, inserting myself where it shouldn't have been. But they saw that I was always engaged.
Yeah, I love this because it makes the sense that you are along with them in the trenches doing the work.
The question is that I'm still navigating is like, how do you reproduce that without doing that again, right? So, I'm in the new business, so what's the lesson learned here? To, not be it, but I think it's just who I am and how I operate.
Yeah. Have you come to any conclusions? Because you're right, that level of camaraderie and loyalty can be bred up to a certain point, maybe somewhere around 20 employees or something like that, where you're sort of in the trenches and everybody knows you're there and they're pulling for you. And I'm not sure it's replicatable at a bigger business. Have you come to any conclusions as to the limits of that sort of style?
I did, because as I started pulling away, I heard a saying, I don't know who said it, or if it is a saying, but it was that people don't work for companies, they work for managers, right? And I think, having my managers have that same work ethic and be in the trenches with the team, made those team members kind of feel like they should be at that level of attentiveness as well. So I think just reproducing that work ethic and having the managers, if the manager's MIA, where's the employee going to be, right? It'll be MIA as well. So that was the way that I was able to kind of keep that going as we scaled.
At what point did you mentioned you were north of $1 million of net profit. At what point did you realize that you had an asset that someone maybe would want to buy one day? It wasn't just a job for you that was paying you well, that it was actually something someone else might be willing to buy from you.
Yeah, that was a journey, because when I started the business, I joke around that I worked for a lunatic myself. Like, it really was a job, and it was, and I worked hard, but it wasn't until like in the industry, especially the industry I'm in, managed services, MSP space, there's a lot of M&A activity, but that's really more recent. Maybe I would say, 8 to 10 years ago, it started becoming really hot and active, and multiples started getting talked about. And I remember I was at a trade conference for our industry, and this company, Evergreen Services Group, which coincidentally I wound up exiting to, they were, the co-founder was on stage and just kind of sharing. And that's kind of when I started thinking about, like, man, what would that look like? And I wound up reaching out to him and had a conversation and asked, what does my EBITDA need to be in order to be a potential acquisition target? And I was really just research. I didn't even know. I knew I wasn't there. And at the time, he said it was $1 million in EBITDA, and they since lowered that number. But with that, I realized, like, my number one smart number as a KPI, as an owner, should be my EBITDA. And it wasn't even something I was tracking at the time. We were tracking net profit, but that's, everyone knows that's a different number. So I went up reaching out to my CPA, and I was like, how do I calculate this? And I didn't even know. And we wound up making some changes to our P&L report so I can get that. And that became my number one smart number. And it was something we started focusing on. And I was like, not that I wanted the optionality. And, so that was kind of my entry into knowing that I was building something that might have some resale value. But yeah, there was a journey that went on from there, but I'll stop there.
I got so many questions about that. What was he or she like on the phone? The person from Evergreen, like this random dude that heard me at a conference, like that's kind of out of the blue. Like what was it like to have the conversation with them?
Ramsey. So it was Ramsey, and he, just super genuine, and basically educate me. I mean, it's such the M&A space. I mean, it well. Like it could be a long-term play, and it was in this case. I mean, this was like 8 years later, I wound up selling to him. So it kind of started with that conversation. I always stayed in the back of my mind, gave me a financial target to aim towards. And then, it was, just fast forward a little bit, I got a call, from, Sydney on his team, now all those years later, just saying, hey, this is Sydney from Evergreen, just want to see if you want to have a conversation about potentially exiting. And instead of just rushing off the phone, I was like, no, I'm not really interested. We're having a fun time. We're making a ton of money. But she's like, just send me your P&L. Let us just look at it. So anyway, that was a long story made short, but yeah.
As you started to see the M&A activity in the managed service provider space heat up, what kind of multiples were you hearing about? What was the sort of scuttlebutt in the industry?
Yeah, the ranges varied. And I will say, like, the commonality you heard was like 6 to 8x EBITDA was kind of what was being thrown out there. There was an interesting play happening earlier on. I think it's happening less now that people are learning how difficult it is to really benefit from or achieve. But they were trying to create platforms. So like the more EBITDA, obviously the higher potentially the multiple, but it had to be, operationally mature company, heavily integrated. So you end up having MSPs like join forces saying, hey, I got 500K in EBITDA, you got 500K in EBITDA. Let's merge together and then we could sell for a higher multiple and it benefits both of us. But, there's so many things that have to go right in that integration. It can't just be two companies that have one set of books, right? Because they see through that every day. But it's been, I would say 6 to 8x. There could be higher, there could be lower, but it depends on EBITDA, the quality of earnings and all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So you're building this business. You've got this $1 million of EBITDA kind of bogey in your head that's been passed down by Ramsey, this guy who runs a company that acquires businesses like yours. And you're thinking, okay, I got to get to $1 million. And then you're hearing 6 to 8. So you're doing the math in your mind. And what does that mean? Are you starting to think about, okay, well, if I get there, like, are you starting to think like, as soon as I crest that threshold, I'm picking up the phone and calling Ramsey? Like,
right.
what were you?
No. I wish I could say that there was that much forethought involved.
Okay.
Because I think the number I didn't know was how much I needed, right? And to
how much you
that,
needed?
Yeah. Like, what did I need? 10 million from the business? Did I need 20? Like, what was my lifestyle number? Like, I'm a young guy, or I think I'm still young. I sold when I was 40, 45, I think. So, with that, a lot of years ahead of me, like, what did that look like? And if I was to exit, how much did I need to never have to work again, potentially? And,
was that your goal to have enough to never have to work again?
It was because I wanted the optionality, and then let opportunities present themselves and see where it went. But that was my goal. So because I throw out this 20 years in business, but you asked how many hours a week I was working. 60 on average. So I mean, there was weeks that were higher, weeks that were lower, but you do the math on that. I mean, that's at least 30 years and 20 years of effort that went into that business. So that was, I was ready to be able to benefit from that and create some legacy wealth potentially. So it was, I didn't know my number, which was why I didn't know, like, at $1 million in EBITDA, if I can get, 8x, I get 8 million, I can cash out and be done. So that was actually a process I had to work through. I didn't even have a financial advisor when I was at the point of, potentially even exiting. I had to, reached out to a buddy that ran a firm, and I was like, how much do I need? And he's like, oh my gosh, okay, let's work this back. So
how did he work it out?
I mean, we looked, I was, like I said, type A. So in my personal finances as well, had everything, cash flow forecasting and everything. So I was able to give him all the data to really look at, and then we ran some different scenarios. They have some, amazing tools that they can leverage and, increase costs in healthcare and all these other things to kind of see, like, projecting out to how long you think you're going to live, what you're going to need in your family and all of that. And you're
not much longer if you're running the help desk.
Right. Right. Yeah. Stress levels vary. Right. But no, so it was part of the process. And I just had to get to a point that I was, comfortable. And it was interesting because when I worked through that process with him, and kind of figured out that the initial kind of LOI number that they were throwing out was actually enough, that the decision then okay, I'm going to sell, man, that was so liberating, because then it just became a matter of, like, who am I going to sell to? It wasn't just by default them. Right now, let's create a bidding war and let's go to market. And that became the focus, and then try to get as much as I could for the business at that point.
Interesting. So when you reached when you realized that what you would likely gain from the sale of your company was enough to quote unquote never have to work again if you didn't want to, that idea, that sense of confidence was what gave you the sort of impetus itself to go to actually hit the bid and sell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think decisions are powerful things. So the decision that I was actually going to at that point was huge. So I had entertained the idea previously, but I was never fully committed to it, and played with talked to some different individuals that were interested, and kind of just try to learn as much as I could through those processes. But I was more just, fishing, until that moment. And then once it got crystallized, then it was, okay, now it's time to move forward.
Walk me through how you approached things differently between when you were quote unquote fishing or tire kicking versus when you made the decision, okay, it's go time. I'm actually going to be serious about this. Because I think a lot of our listeners have flirted with the idea of selling. They've entertained the idea. They've talked to people. They've kind of just kicked it around. But it sounds like for you, there was a binary moment. You said the word decision, which I think is a good one. You're like, no, we're doing it. And it sounds like it was a very emphatic decision. You went from tire kicking, fishing to like a different posture. Describe the different posture. Like I'd be curious, what does fishing look like, and what does like decision made look like?
Yeah. I will say, just to step back for a second, that deal structure was part of it. It wasn't just money, in the sense of like the potential buyer, were they a right cultural fit? Like there was a lot of other things other than just the dollars, right? It was like, what was the deal structure? How much was still at risk potentially? Did I have enough? Like, did I de-risk it enough that if this thing went sideways post sale, that I was still had enough, right? So there was that aspect of it. But then also, did I find a potential good home for my baby, my business, and my staff, right, and my clients? So there was other variables that kind of, it was fortunate that Evergreen, the one I exited to, checked all those boxes for me. So it kind of gave me like, right, this was where I'm going, and then let me go ahead and see if I can't find maybe a better, sweeter deal, and then create a bidding war. So I think it was. I just want to step back and let you know there was other determining factors that then made it that, okay, I've checked all these boxes. I met this criteria that, yes, I'm willing to sell to this deal that's now presented in front of me, but now let me go actually, go to market.
Okay, so let's walk through that, because if I'm getting the story correct, Ramsey was the guy you met 8 years previous after a conference speech. His employee is a woman named Sydney.
Yeah.
She reached out to you and said, hey, Doug, are you ready to talk? Send me your P&L. Like, pick up the story from there.
Right.
What happens next?
Yeah. So, I basically, it was the, hey, I'm having too much fun. I'm making too much money. Like I was not working that much in the business finally at that point. And we were doing, well over $1 million a year in profit at that point. And it was cash flowing great. And it was just, it was fun. It was exciting. So to get that call, and then, send the P&L, just send it over. We'll take a look, and just, so sent it over. And I knew, like, we were running, that was part of why we got such a premium for the business. It was high quality. Our books were clean, like everything was dialed in. I had, in preparation for a potential sale, again, it was just, I felt like there was things that just had to be done. Like I already had cleaned up my balance sheet, which was, my gosh, what a effort, and like spent 20 grand with a CPA to get that all dialed in. But it was just like something that just should be done and had to be done.
What kind of cleanup did your balance sheet? What kind of stuff did you do?
Yeah, we had a lot of hardware leasing that we did. So there was a lot of assets that, different durations and things that were on there. So that had to get in order. And I just knew it did. So there was some preface anyway. But so by the time she called, like all that stuff was clean. So there was some work that had to be done even to be able to entertain it. But I had sent that over. And with that, Cindy called me up and she was like, hey, we're talking over here. We love what we're seeing. This is kind of what we're thinking from a number perspective.
So she said it verbally?
Verbally, right before.
What was your reaction to
that? I guess a little disappointment, but I saw opportunity. I was like, okay, we'll see where this goes. It sounded like a good number, but then that's when I went to my financial advisor, or my now financial advisor, and said like, hey, Bo, is this enough? Like, and the answer was yes, like it is enough. And so with that's when the decision was made. Okay, now I need to, start working this deal, right? And it continued from there.
Yeah, what happens next?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So if Evergreen hears this, I'm sorry. I don't know if they know this backstory, but ultimately engaged another potential buyer that I had a relationship with, and brought them to the table, and deal structure, and having that conversation. It was just two different ones that I went back and forth with, and basically they quickly. It was interesting when I Sydney was like, hey, we want to hear back in the next, 24 hours. And I'm like, I'm not selling a car, like this is, or buying a car, sliding a number, across the table at me. No offense to car dealers out there, but with that, so the timelines were short. Like they wanted decisions quickly, and when they know the sales, right? They're selling. Their job is to buy businesses. That was also an epiphany I had. So they were in it to buy me. So with that, I brought another company to the table, told them the timeline, what was happening, and they quickly jumped into action, wanted to look at the numbers, made me an offer. And then basically I was really transparent with both of them, operating well within my NDAs. I'll say that with each other's company, but on deal structure and on in essence, dollar amounts or multiples. I did learn through that multiples, I feel, was a construct, and that it was really value of the business. And it's mentally where I wound up, that like the business was worth a certain amount, and I didn't like the dollar amount was a dollar amount, because ultimately, even the way that the LOI was written eventually was that it wasn't a multiple of EBITDA. It was actually this amount for the business, and then it was just a matter of quality of earnings to validate that. So that was a lesson learned, I'll share. But with that, so I basically in 2 weeks of just going back and forth, and I did get some great advice from a mentor of mine. He said that you still have to operate the business the way it's running. Don't make decisions like as if you're exiting or selling. It's like 2 weeks is sounds like a short time, but it's long days, and a lot of decisions get made in 2 weeks. But with that, he said, and one of his other piece of advice was, when you work on it, put it in a box in your mind, and then put it away when you're done, so you could focus on the day to day. And that was great advice I got, because I got in the evenings I was working on the M&A, and during the day I was running the company and acting as if none of that was going on. And my leadership team, no one knew about any of this happening. So with that, in 2 weeks we went back and forth, and then finally settled on a deal structure and LOI, and came to an ultimate price, and was able to execute that. And then that was actually, that was the tip of the iceberg in the process. There was so much that happened, after that.
I'm assuming they came up a little bit in number from your original number that you were.
Right.
It wasn't low enough to
assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't go into that, but it was a worthwhile 2 weeks.
Can you share on a percentage basis how much you got them to go up? Like, was it a big double-digit number, or just a jump?
It was enough to be worth it. I don't think it'd be fair for me to share that for them.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. Totally understand. But it was enough to make it worthwhile for you. Talk to me about deal structure. Because a lot of times in service businesses, there's an earnout. You mentioned that yours was 2 year. Walk me through, if you don't mind, sort of how the earnout was structured, what percentage of the deal that was at risk, so to speak.
Yeah. So they had a unique approach, and this is public with them, that I don't know if they're still doing this. I think they still are, but they were 100% cash deal. So it wasn't rollover equity or anything, like you didn't maintain ownership or have to buy into the new parent or whatever the case may be. So that was extremely attractive to me, being A-type controlling. Like I didn't want to relinquish a large percentage of my, control over my, fate of those dollars to someone.
I think you'd be a crappy employee, by the way, Doug. I'm just getting a sense that working for someone else is not in your DNA.
I worked. My clients were. I was their employee, and my staff, I was their employee at times too. So I navigated it. But you're right. But with that, that was their deal structure, which was very attractive to me in the sense of like being able to control my own future. The alternative was a percentage of rollover with, a hopeful promise that it would grow over time and maybe had to stay in for a year or two. So I deal structure wise, 100% cash. Again, that's public with them that they do that. I think they actually give you an opportunity to buy in now, which I wish I would have. They've done exceptionally well. But with that, a very small percentage of it was basically put at risk based on, EBITDA targets being hit for the business. So I had to come to terms with that the percentage I was getting, on closing was enough again, and that the rest of it would have been nice to have and gravy, if I was to hit those targets. And,
are we talking sort of 10, 20% at risk on that kind of number?
I can't share that specifically, but I can say it wasn't that significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a small percentage. So when you say 100% cash, you're referring to the deal was you were not being asked to roll over equity, but
Correct.
The cash was paid the vast majority up front with a small component of cash at risk tied to hitting EBITDA targets in the future.
Correct. Yep.
Got it. How did they incentivize your managers to stay on?
So this was unique about them, and why I appreciated their structure, in that my company still operates as True Technology. They have what they call a decentralized approach. So like from a client perspective, like still the same team. They don't centralize services, meaning a lot of times some of these companies will roll up the help desk or roll up the network operations center and things like that. So they allow the company to, like, what made it great, to continue to operate that way. So they did wind up placing, eventually a new general manager to kind of displace me when I left. But other than that, there was really not much change there. So the employees already had a great place to be and had a growing business that they were a part of and a great culture. So that was, just basically a transition. That was what was attractive to me as far as giving them a great place to continue to work from.
I've heard from other founders that telling their employees is one of the hardest things they've ever had to do. What was it like for you?
Man, yeah. So this was this was interesting. So I didn't want to say anything until the quality of earnings was done. I've heard nightmares, not about Evergreen, just in general, about this concept of a retrade, where, like, whatever's on the LOI, once they go through the quality of earnings, you wind up, they offered you 10 and they come in at 9 after that. And then you're so invested at that point, like, what are you doing? So one of my business coach actually told me, like, expect it and know the number you're willing to walk away from. And fortunately, this was the number that, they gave me on the LOI was the number that we closed at. So, because I said we ran a high grade, high quality business, so there was nothing hiding in the books that came out later. But I wanted to wait until those numbers matched before I told anyone, which meant that we were going to be really close to close at that point. And it was interesting. They wanted to interview my leadership team, and I said no, they're not finding out until this is done. So it was very close. And then they even made it optional for me, but ultimately I wound up letting them talk to them once I told them. So I basically, it was one-on-one. I mean, I had strong relationships with these individuals. One of them, I went to his house and chatted with them about it. So I want to let them know they were all super. I'm getting chills thinking about it. Happy for me. And they knew, again, the 20 years of effort I'd put in and the hard work, and they were deserving of it. Deserving of the same thing as well. But they were happy for me, and that was huge. And they were supportive through that. And I had to let them know. I mean, having the story of, like, decentralized, that everything stays the same, the brand stays the same, there's no job risk. I mean, I'm vetted this for them, and they trusted me, and that's what wound up being true. So that was big. So it was really not a whole lot of risk for them through this.
How did you frame it? Like, I'd be curious to know the first sentence. Like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about something. You go to the guy's house.
Right.
What do you say?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember, but it was, my heart was probably racing, in the sense of, like, not knowing what they're going to say, but I knew they supported me and we had great relationships. So I think it was more just, I have some news to share with you. Some exciting things are happening. I'm sure I, spun it in a very positive way. And then, just unleashed at that point of what was going on and what I've been working on. And there was, one of the things was I kept all these meetings related to it on my personal schedule. I used my personal email, but I would still have to block time out on my business schedule, and they, there was comments made like, we knew something was going on. Like you had too many things blocked out on your calendar that were set to private. Like what was that? So there was that, but it was, it spun in a positive way and they received it in a positive way. It was good. But I will say the journey from there though, it turned out that in our agreements, the devil's in the details. In our own contracts, we had it where our clients had to we couldn't assign the agreement to a new entity, that they had to approve the assignment. So this was, I don't think they do deals like this anymore. This was actually a asset purchase, not a stock purchase, which is a very big difference. And being that it was an asset purchase, I was selling the assets of the company, which in essence were these contracts. Big part of that's the value. There's goodwill, but all that. So with that, one of the contingencies of closing was that I had to get 80% of a recurring revenue assigned in it was 24 hours that they gave me. So it was talk about dialing for dollars. Like I had to figure out a way to do this in mass across all our customers. And the crazy thing was, John, that the clients wound up knowing, because if this didn't happen, if I didn't get to 80%, then they would have had to make a decision if they proceeded or not. But, then if the deal didn't happen, then like how do I back out of it? Our clients know. And in hindsight, I did this in the wrong order, but the rest of my staff didn't know either. So here I am telling customers that we're doing this before the rest of the team knew. In hindsight, I should have told them ahead of time, because just in case, because the clients knew, but live and learn. But that was crazy. I aged probably 2 years and 24 hours trying to make that happen, and it did. And my clients were supportive.
How did you frame it with customers? Because these are people who rely on you for their technology. And even though it's a bigger company and it's like there's still disruption. Wait a minute, where are you going? Are you going to I'd imagine there's a bit of dancing that you got to do at that point.
Yeah. So fortunately, I was not involved in service delivery anymore. So, I was kind of out of the day to day, and we were even new clients that we had brought on. Some of them had never even met me, and we had got it to that point, which was amazing. It took forever to get there. But with that, so, it was more just like trying to downplay the impact of it, explaining again that decentralized, like who this company is and what they do and why they do what they do. They take the Berkshire Hathaway approach and they hold all these investments in all these companies forever and ever. And they never plan to roll up and sell. So I had to explain and spin, let them know, and then tell them like, hey, by the way, I need to send you a DocuSign right now for you to transfer this agreement over, and I need it in the next 24 hours so I can proceed with this sale. So
I'm just laughing because I can imagine you calling up some customer who you haven't spoken to in like years. Hey, Bob, how are you? How are your kids? Great to hear. Can we get I can just imagine you like going, I've got 24 hours to get to 80%. I don't have time to talk about your kids and their graduation and all the stuff that they probably, the small talk.
I'm glad you're laughing at my pain and suffering right now, but no, it was awesome my clients, it was the same reaction I got, that I did from the team, and that they were happy for me and they were supportive, and they're like, and they turned it around, and we got there. We signed more than 80%, in that 24-hour period. And then it was having the conversation with the individual team members and letting them know, which I also did one-on-one.
How was that?
That was, most were excited for me and supportive. I would say that I was a little surprised. There was some a little whiff them, what's in it for me? Like, okay, Doug's having this big exit event. Like, where does that leave me type thing? For the most part, that was not the case, but there were some that were like that. And I remember I reached out to the CEO of the acquiring platform, and I shared that with him. And he goes, "Oh, that happens." And I'm like, "Why didn't you warn me?" I kind of got blindsided the first time of how do I navigate this? And so that was interesting. But for the most part, across the board, again, happy for me, knew the effort I had put in, and they saw, the reward I was getting for that. That was positive overall.
Were they at all incentivized, or did they share in any element of the sale? The kind of rank and file employees?
No, they did not.
Got it. Okay. So their reaction was like, okay, that's great for you, but like, well, how about me?
Yeah, I think the bigger picture was, so the acquiring company, they're $1 billion in revenue. They're, thousands of employees at this point across all their holdings. And so to be part of this larger, even though they're, still operating independently, they're part of this much larger entity now, which creates, they intentionally kind of cross-pollinate knowledge across different, holdings. So for me, it was exciting for me to be letting them know, hey, you now have a much bigger opportunity, as you get exposed, cross exposure to these organizations, and there may be some opportunities to, move up or around within this organization, which I think has already happened. So, that was exciting for me to share with them and paint that picture for them as well.
And did they buy it? Like, were they like, yeah, actually, now that you say that is actually kind of exciting.
Right. Yeah. The proof's in the pudding, right? So, everyone's hesitant until they see it occur. So I stayed on, 6 months post exit. So that was part of it, of kind of seeing the transition through and making sure that everyone was kind of made whole through that, which was the case. So that was, but it was obviously hesitance, concern, but I did my best to kind of shore them up and let them know that they were in good hands and no one was getting let go and there wasn't consolidation happening or anything like that.
What made you decide to leave before the end of the earnout?
So that was an interesting journey. I think I was a few months in post exit, and kind of just looking at, like, I still operated as if I owned it. That's just my personality, if you haven't picked up on that already. So that, engagement level, stress level is the wrong word. I think, for me, stress was healthy. I was engaged every day, except for when it put me in the hospital, as I shared. That was not healthy. But, but I realized that, like, man, I'm just so, like, wrapped around this thing, and which I loved and I enjoyed. But I was like, I really needed to, like, for my own, just separate, spend more time with my family, figure out. There was a lot of things that, and I hate to say I neglected on the personal side. Like, I mentioned I didn't have a financial advisor. I didn't even have a will. I didn't have, like, a lot of those basic things in place, so I was like, I need to step away. And now I had, to figure out, I had built up quite a bit of cash running the business, but I had now a sizable amount of money that I had to figure out, how do you make money with money and kind of de-risk that, in a way. So I was like, I needed to kind of step back. Once I realized that, I did, I actually went post exit. I decided a 6-month cool off period, I called it, where I didn't touch it. Like, we had money already, but I didn't touch this. I didn't do anything crazy and, go buy a yacht or anything like that. But after the 6-month cool off period, then that's when I was like, you know what, I really need to focus on, investing this properly, protecting it properly, and really start to unwind and figure out, my own, clock, and get my, focus on myself and my health and my family.
Well, it sounds like you did just that. What was Ramsey's reaction when you said you were leaving early?
They were supportive. I think that they've seen, I think they're up to 90 acquisitions of companies like mine now. So, there's a variety of different reactions post sale, right? Some know up front that they're going to leave and it's planned into the exit strategy. I had thought I would actually stay on. I just, again, loved being there and loved working with the team. So, it was the CEO of the platform that I rolled up under that I had let know. And his response, I'll be honest with you, was, I saw this coming. He just knew. So, again, you mentioned that comment about, you probably wouldn't make a great employee. I probably wasn't the best. My priorities and his priorities didn't always line up, but but it was a learning journey regardless.
Yeah. Hey, I really appreciate you sharing the story. It's an amazing story. Great win for you, for sure. Are you up for a quick lightning round of questions before I let you go?
Yeah, sure. Shoot.
Awesome. Question number 1. So you had 2 potential acquirers that you were playing one off the other. Was there a dirty trick that someone tried to play on you that was designed to kind of get your business for less than it was worth?
I do think that the second party intended a retrade. So I think the number, their ultimate number actually turned out to be higher in the end as far as the offer goes. But I think it was based on the fact that they wholly planned to retrade. That I can't say for sure, but that was the feeling I got.
What gave you that feeling?
It felt like the number that was provided was almost like this will just get them to sign, and then we'll figure it out from there type. I don't know. I just started feeling that way.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it was true, but that's what I felt.
Yeah. What was the biggest mistake you made in the process of selling your company?
Biggest mistake I made in the process of selling my company.
Like if you could have a mulligan do-over, like what would you do different?
So, I still kind of reflect back on what I shared with you earlier about that they hit the EBITDA target year over year and I wasn't even there anymore. So, could I have or should I have, incentivized them and then still disappeared and cash flowed that thing and just built up the enterprise value even more, or just continued to scale and was worth more for a larger exit. So that's kind of a thought that lingers, but that everything worked out, the way it should have.
It's like when Bob Barker in The Price is Right would say, like, do you want the dishwasher guaranteed, or do you want a chance at the new car?
Right, exactly.
Oh, man.
Yeah, these are tough. That's why I said decisions. Like they're tough, but I feel like when I make one, like I try to own it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hindsight's always 2020. It's always like easier to kind of rethink in the background, but it sounds like a great exit. What was the emotional low for you? I'd imagine there were some times for you that were difficult.
PostExit?
Yeah, I mean, take from the moment Sydney called you saying, "Hey, show us your books," to today. Like, what's been the lowest kind of ebb emotionally?
Yeah, so I think PostExit was an interesting kind of mental journey. I joke around that I went from a VIP to a PIP, to a previously important person. Every day as a CEO of a company, you're getting approached with dozens of decisions that have to be made potentially. And I used to joke around like I used to get decision fatigue, but then like no one was asking me anything anymore. So it was like my identity was really tied up with being a CEO and being an entrepreneur and running a business, which I'm excited to say I'm doing again. But with that, I think that was the structure that I had around business planning. So we had a business coach and we followed like an EOS, great game of business process, and Rockefeller habits and all of that intertwined. And so we did, quarterly planning, 3-year vision, 1 year, all that, and broke our rocks down. And I didn't have that structure in my personal life. So I actually found myself like craving structure and process around how do I do that and how do I have goals? And I would say, so you talk about lows, I want to like finding myself trading stresses. And what I mean by that was like, I had the stress of this business that I was scaling and the risk around it and all of that. And then now I'm like stressing out about the financial markets and, what's happening with the money and what I'm doing with it and I'm making the right decisions. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm supposed to be, my goal was, be stress-free, and I have the ability to do that. So I did wind up engaging a life coach. I interviewed many. And, Coach Chris Patterson, I'll give him a shout out. Awesome guy. And he wound up, it was a Bob Proctor program, Proctor Gallagher Institute. And it was actually structured process for goal setting and for, identifying bad habits and displacing them. And it kind of gave me the structured process that I crave and love in my personality. And I was able to then apply that to my personal life, which really got me, I think, back more focused on how do I grow and expand and continue to scale post-exit and not just, kind of just exist at that point.
That's such a cool insight because, those very qualities that allowed you to build such a successful business, you just can't turn them off on a dime. And yet, that's what happens when you're not running the company anymore. So that's really cool. Yeah. So that's Bob Proctor. I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about his stuff, but he's got some methodology. I see.
Yeah, he's since passed, but his work is still out there. Proctor Gallagher Institute and Coach Chris Patterson is a certified coach for them and runs a program around it. Yeah.
Cool. I'll look him up. What about the highest emotional point? Like, do you remember where you were when the check hit, or like what was for you that kind of like, yeah, this is awesome?
Yeah. So I will tell you a funny story that we were on the closing call, and attorneys are on there, the buyer, the seller, all that, and they're basically like, buyer okay, seller okay, are you good to do the transfer? And we have 20 people on this call, the people that are actually have the money and are actually releasing the funds and all that. And all of a sudden they're like, everybody's good, okay, transfer sent, and then they're like, okay, everyone have a good day. And I'm like, whoa, like time out. Can we round of applause? Can we just do something here to like mark this occasion? So that was kind of fun and funny. But I would say it was when I signed the LOI, because that was really, I remember I had Sydney on FaceTime, had my wife and son there. And, they were a big part of this journey for me, obviously. And with that, we're just standing there, and I remember just signing this thing on FaceTime with Sydney there. And it was just that was a momentous moment for me. I mean, we had built up some cash, like I said. So when the wire hit, yes, it was just, that wasn't as significant as a moment. I was nervous, constantly refreshing, knowing what I do about cybersecurity, make sure the money makes it to me and not somebody else's account. But it was signing the LOI, because that was my moment of I'm doing this.
Yeah. That's awesome. And to do that with your wife and son there with you, that must have felt cool.
It was. Yeah.
What, in addition to, you mentioned the Bob Proctor stuff, which was sort of post-exit, was there anything that you relied on to kind of educate yourself about M&A, the process of selling? Are there tools that you can point our listeners to?
There's a great book called Built to Sell that they might want to read. I know I had read it earlier on as well. But I personally, I mean, it's funny, ChatGPT wasn't a thing a few years ago, which is crazy to think about. I would be in it, putting the LOI in it and analyzing it and all that. But back then it was literally, I was calling anyone and everyone I knew that had exited to get their take and opinion. So fortunately, I'm blessed in the friends that I have, and that, some had been through multiple exits. So I was able to get some solid feedback from them and advice, and that was able to help in a big way.
What'd you buy yourself as a trophy?
A McLaren 720S.
No, you didn't. Did you really?
I did. Yep. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That was a fun car.
What is a McLaren what do you call it? McLaren
720, 720 horsepower.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does a McLaren 720S run these days?
MSRP is $450.
Because that's a really good way to use your money.
Right. I only owned it for a year, so I only had the depreciation hit of that. But
that's
yeah,
awesome.
No, it was I'm a car guy, so.
Do you let your kid drive it?
I offered. He wouldn't drive it, he was so nervous. I offered. My wife drove it the day I sold it, and she regretted not had driving it earlier.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations. I hope you remember the success and the achievement, 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears every time you get in that car.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Doug, in addition to driving around Jacksonville in your McLaren, what else are you doing for work these days? Tell us about where people can find you if they want to reach out.
No, I appreciate that. I'm wholly invested in this new venture, MSP Fuel, and I'm proud to say my son's working for me now in this.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's big. He wanted to work for me at TrueTech, and when I sold that was actually part of the journey I didn't share with you, but he shared interest in that, which created am I building a multi-generational company here? So that kind of made me think about longer term vision and legacy. But yeah, mspfuel.com is our website. But basically, we built a coaching, training, mastermind program for MSPs to help them get to a point that they can exit, scale, earn more profit with less stress in a shorter period of time. My last 3 to 5 years in the business were exponential growth once I unlocked a lot of these things. So basically, that's what we're bringing to bear in that new company.
mspfuel.com. We'll put that and Doug's contact information in the show notes at builttosell.com. Doug, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.